Hello, fellow teachers out there and educators, bilingual educators, or prospective CLIL, TKT CLIL test takers. This is the first video of another series that we're putting together on answering the questions that will be on the TKT test. Not the exact questions, but the types of questions that you will find on the test. And what we're going to do to make this video more realistic and more useful to all of us educators is to actually use a sample test that was put together by Cambridge so that the questions that we work on are similar to the ones that you're going to find, and the practice that you do here is actually applicable to your actually preparing for the test and hopefully taking the test. So let's move on. What is the focus of this first video? Well, this first video will focus on task 1 of the first part of the TKT CLIL test. Why are we talking about task 1 and not question 1? Well, because the TKT test is not really divided by questions, even though there's a total number of questions, but the questions are grouped by tasks. And the first part of the test has a certain number of tasks, and this is the first one. So this first task contains 7 out of the 25 questions that you will see in the first part of the test. The name of this question, the title, of this task, is Main Names of CLIL. So there's 4 letters that describe the main names of the CLIL program, or the CLIL approach, if you prefer. And then you have the classroom activities. The numbers that correspond to the classroom activities are actually the questions that we're going to answer. So this is just to make it clear. So let's understand this better. So the main names of CLIL, which is the top of the title of this task, this first task that we're going to tackle today, is actually one of the components of the test. This table has been taken from one of the manuals, or the manual about CLIL that Cambridge puts together and makes it available for free on the website to teachers and those test takers who are preparing. You can see the title here, Knowledge of CLIL and Principles of CLIL. So that's the first part of the CLIL test. And this area of the test covers a certain number of areas of teaching knowledge, and each one of the tasks, each one of the areas, or this section per se, to put it better, consists of 4 tasks in a total of 25 questions. So you could see briefly from the question that we showed you before, let's go back to it here, that this is a matching type, right? You have to match the aims to the classroom activities. So this is a matching type. It's not a multiple choice type of task. And this particular task focuses on the aims and rationale for CLIL knowledge. So that's what we're being tested on here when we take this test. It's important to understand this because if you have this bird's eye view of what exactly the task that you're doing is focusing on, you can take a much better test. And that's the reason why we're covering this beforehand. So what are the main aims of CLIL, and why is this task titled Main Aims of CLIL? Well, because when we study CLIL and we learn about this approach, one of the first things that we learn is that CLIL has 4 basic tenets, which are called the 4 C's of CLIL. And they are communication, cognition, content, and citizenship. And if you look at the task carefully, you will notice that each one of the letters corresponds to one of those 4 C's. So letter A, to focus on content vocabulary, content. B, to develop communication skills, communication. C, to develop cognitive skills, cognition. And D, to raise awareness of citizenship. That's culture, which is also called citizenship in many CLIL programs. So how do we go about answering or solving this task? Well, the key here is to align aims, the 4 aims, A, B, C, and D, to the activities described from 1 through 7. And one strategy I would recommend for using with this type of question is to, first of all, identify the actors, who is doing what in the activity. What are they doing? And what are some key words that describe the activity they're doing? If we go about doing that, of course we have to do that pretty quickly because the test is timed, even though it's not rushed. We do have enough time, but that strategy should not take more than it would normally take for you to answer the question without the strategy. So the goal here is not to make it longer, but also make it more effective. Okay, so let's see this strategy in action. So here we have the main aims, which we have read. So let's take a look at the classroom activities. Learners discuss in groups how they set up their science experiments. Learners find out about different ways to reuse materials. The teacher highlights the parts of a river from a geography text, which the learners have just read. In pairs, learners present their technology projects using PowerPoint. Learners classify plants according to several criteria. Learners predict the outcome of an electricity experiment. And learners do a web search to see how to clean up a local pond. So following the strategy that we highlighted before of matching activities with aims, but highlighting who is doing what they're doing, and some other keywords. So let's see how that looks like before we answer. So let's go to number 1. Learners discuss in groups how they set up their science experiment. So the actors here are learners. What are they doing? They are discussing in groups. This is important. Okay, they're discussing, but not only by themselves, in groups. And they're talking about their science experiments. We have reference to content here, science experiments, but we don't really have any specific reference to content vocabulary. So it's definitely not letter A. There's nothing in activity number 1 that relates to citizenship per se, because there's nothing here. There's multiple implications of this activity to citizenship, but there's nothing explicit in the statement itself. So we can rule out letter A, and we can rule out letter D. So that leaves us 2 letters, B and C, to develop communication skills and develop cognitive skills. Of course, any discussion will involve cognitive skills, but the verb discuss, and especially the type of discussion, which will take place in groups, refers directly to a type of communication skill. So for number 1 here, we have letter B. So the activity of learners discussing in groups how they set up science experiments is an example of developing communication skills. So this is the strategy we're going to continue using from now on, and we're going to tackle one of these questions at a time. So let's move on. Number 2, learners find out about different ways to reuse materials. So they're finding out about something, so notice that the verb is not very informative. We're definitely not talking about a specific communication skill or a specific cognitive skill. Yes, there's communication, there's cognition involved in finding out. But the verb doesn't encode one of those 2 activities more precisely, so we can eliminate them. It could be awareness of citizenship, it could be content vocabulary. Well, there's no explicit reference to vocabulary on materials and what types of materials, so we can rule out letter A. So that leaves us letter D. So let's see if this is really an example of letter D. Well, when students are learning to reuse materials, learning to reuse materials has direct implications in the student's environment. It helps save resources. It helps make the world a cleaner place because we're not digging for more materials. So that ecological repercussion of this activity is actually an act of citizenship. So by learning how to find different ways to reuse materials, students are learning to exercise their citizenship, because by doing that, they'll be contributing to making the planet better. So that's how we need to think when answering these types of questions. And I hope that has been helpful and useful to you as an example. So number 2, letter D. That's the answer that we need. Let's look at number 3. The teacher highlights the parts of a river from a geography text which the learners have just read. So the teacher is the actor. The teacher is highlighting. And some other keywords here are parts of a river from a geography text. So we are talking about language from specific content. Are we talking about vocabulary? Yes, we are, because we're talking about the parts of a river. So, and I know that the students are not developing communication skills because the actor is the teacher. And I know that the students are not developing cognitive skills because, again, the actor is the teacher. And that is not an example of raising awareness of citizenship. Because even though knowing parts of a river is important, that doesn't have direct implications in terms of citizenship. It may have indirect implications if the students are using the names of the parts of the river to do something else, right? But that's not what the activity is describing. So, as we can see here, number 3, A, to focus on content vocabulary. All right, let's move on to number 4. In pairs, learners present their technology projects using PowerPoint. Okay, pairs present, and they're using PowerPoint. I know presentation skills may involve some cognition, but it's not a direct reference to cognitive skills. It's not a direct reference to a citizenship, so C and D we can eliminate. Is there anything about content vocabulary here? No reference. So we're talking about communication skills, which we could assume by just looking at the fact that learners will be presenting. And this is one of the ways to analyze the question. So 4, letter B. Number 5, learners classify plants according to several criteria. So the verb here is quite important, classify. Because to classify, students could be using communication skills if they did it in groups. But if they do it individually, they're not going to be using communication skills as much. So we can rule that out because there's no explicit reference to communication. There's reference to content, plants, but there's no reference to vocabulary related to that content, even though students will be using it, but that's not explicit in the description of the activity. So we can rule out A as well. Are they developing cognitive skills? They are, because to classify plants is to get all the knowledge they know about plants and organize that knowledge so they can classify the plants. So that's true. And do we have an explicit reference to the practice or the awareness of citizenship? No, we don't. So from this analysis, we can conclude that number 5 aligns with letter C. Moving on now. Number 6, learners predict the outcome of an electricity experiment. Well, that's an interesting one also, because when you are predicting the outcome, yes, you are communicating if you're doing it in groups, but you may not be communicating with your peers if you're doing that individually. So let's rule out B. We're not focusing specific on content vocabulary, even though there's a reference to content in the statement, but there's not a reference to vocabulary here. There's also not a direct connection to awareness of citizenship. And if students are predicting an outcome, they're definitely developing their cognitive skills. So 6 is another example of developing cognitive skills. And last but not least, we need to look at number 7 now. Based on number 7, learners do a web search to see how to clean up a local pond. So the action is to do a web search, which could be done individually or in groups, so no direct reference to communication or in pairs, but this is not specified here. To clean up a local pond. Well, cleaning up a local pond, first of all, the pond is local. It has a direct effect. The activity has a direct effect on the local environment. And cleaning up is actually good for the environment. It is an act of citizenship. So if you analyze that there's not a direct reference to a specific communication skill, to a specific cognitive skill, even though to do a search involves some degree of cognition, but we're not being specific. But the reference here that's more explicit is to raising awareness of citizenship. So we're going to stick to D, and that's the answer for number 7. So I hope this question has given you a taste of what you're going to find in the test. This is exactly a question, or exactly what a question in the test, in the TKT CLIL test looks like. And you will probably find one task that, if it's not the same, very similar to this one in the test when you decide to take it. So if you're interested in learning more about the TKT CLIL test, specifically for this type of question, you can look at the TKT CLIL course module, a book by Kay Bentley, which I highly recommend if you want to study for the test, and the handbook for teachers that is available for free in the Cambridge website. If you just Google TKT CLIL handbook for teachers, you will find it. And the book by Kay Bentley, you probably have to go somewhere and purchase it if you want to use it. Those are the resources that I have left for you. And at the end of this video, you will see a reference to 2 additional videos that we have recorded. One that will teach you a little bit more about the principles of CLIL, the aims of CLIL, the 4 C's of CLIL. And the other one that will teach you about Bloom's taxonomy and cognitive skills, if you want to understand which verbs directly connect to cognitive skills and the skills described in Bloom's taxonomy. So watch the videos, like the videos, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments in the section below if you would like to engage in a discussion about this question or anything that we talked about. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.